on everything. Hi, everybody. Um,
Mm.
Giving this a moment. And looks like we're recording. And we are live. So welcome. My name is Abe Bonowitz with Death Penalty Action. I'm here with my friend, Reverend Susan Hudson McBride. I just know her as Susan. And we have known each other for some 20 plus years, I think.
Yeah.
It was great to see you again when I was in Nashville for the most recent execution, and we got to spend some time together after that. And you gave me a copy of your new book. Here it is, When God Goes Missing. And I said to Susan, we get to talk about this. Let's figure it out. And here we are on December 30th, when everybody is not doing anything except, well, hopefully, I'm sure a lot of people are working or doing whatever they're doing, but I'm grateful to be in a space where I've got the time and
Yeah.
we get to settle a little bit and be together. So welcome to everybody that's watching. We're going to try to this is being broadcast on several channels. So if you have questions, the best place for me to be able to find them are going to be on the Death Penalty Action Facebook feed, or I'll also try to look at the Death Penalty Action um, uh, uh, YouTube page. But ideally, that's where the comments and questions should go, is on the Facebook feed. But and of course, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the world before we close out. But I want to welcome Susan McBride, and maybe we should just start with just quickly how we met, and then I want to get into your story. But do you
Yeah.
remember the first time that we met?
I do. It was in the late 90s. We were in Tennessee. We were about to execute the first person in over 40 years. And we were all shell shocked. And I know you came to town and kind of helped us get prepared, for what was going to happen.
Mhm. So let's just clarify that we were against the execution. Tennessee was going to do
Yes.
it.
Yeah. Tennessee.
but,
Yeah.
but the collective we is in the state operating in our name is
Yeah.
yes. Sorry, it,
Yeah.
it's it is that was Mr. Coe, right?
Yeah. Robert Glencoe. Yeah.
And I have some vague memories of that. It was um, one of the times we was to arrest and got arrested, and I
Yeah.
made the mistake of going limp. I decided I was going to make them carry me, and quickly realized how stupid that was. They zip tied my hands behind my back and then picked me up by my arms. It was super painful, but
Yeah.
but I actually and just happened across some photographs from that, while I was down there in Tennessee, that were by a photographer for the Tennessean, who had a retrospective of his coverage of the Tennessee State Police. And somehow our action from protesting at the governor's mansion there in Tennessee made it into that retrospective. And, there it
Yeah.
is. So, what I remember about you, Susan, was being in a place of no fear and wanting to interrupt what government was doing. And so reading your book, here we are, get to talk about this book. There's a scroller on the bottom here, and I'm going to put this. Let's put this in here so you can see where to find the book. It's on Amazon. But When God Goes Missing, um, looking for meaning through the eyes of a Southern child, and that's of course you in the picture on the
Yes,
book
it is.
as a Southern child. So it. I feel like we need a lot more than the time we're going to give it today to really unpack all of this. But what I've found, I find myself with so many questions, and so many um, realizations about you and what I've seen you doing in your life's work and the work we've gotten to do together. So I guess really, I've made a few notes here, but let's just start with maybe a little bit more of an introduction, self-introduction by yourself, and perhaps what made you decide to put this on the paper and publish it.
Well, the book it covers a wide berth. I was born in 1951, and the period of time of my childhood was the Jim Crow South, and we were part of my childhood was Vietnam War, women's rights, the Stonewall riots. It was when there was so much going on, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and what I didn't know at the time was the prison in Alabama had an electric chair, and it was called the Yellow Mama. And my mother was one of those people that she would put me and my little brother in the car, and we would just go ride. And that's how I ended up being in the room near the Yellow Mama. And that was the beginning for me of becoming an abolitionist. I didn't understand. I was only maybe 6 years old. But my mother's response to it and the response of the people at the prison, it was clear there was something really awful going on there.
I want to talk more about that, and that's actually one of the shorter chapters in the book, and kind of leaves it hanging for a minute. I think,
Mhm.
from my view. But I did want to invite you, just tell us a little bit more about Reverend Susan Hudson McBride. Where you live in Nashville. You've got your
Mhm.
divinity degree, I suppose, from where, and I mean, how do people identify you in a formal
Yeah.
context as a book author?
I went back to school as an old lady student at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And a big part of the reason for going back was I felt like there was something missing. I needed to take apart what I had grown up hearing. And I grew up in a very evangelical, fundamentalist church, and I wanted to clear up some things. And that was the one of the reasons. When I was in divinity school, I was talking to one of my professors about, I said, when I was a child, my mother hired a woman to take care of us. And this woman she was Black. She was the maid. She took care of me, took care of my mother's house. And this woman, when my parents weren't around, would talk with me about what was going on. I got to learn some things from her perspective. And what ends up happening, or at least for me in a situation like that, I learned that there was a very different way of looking at things than what my parents and my church were sharing with me. So when I went back to divinity school, one of the things I told my Old Testament professor was, I have this urge to find out about, whatever happened to the children I used to play with that were the children of what then was called the help. And my professor said, you need to go do that. And so I did. I went down to Huntsville. I made some calls. I had no idea where these people were. And I got on the phone with them, and their first response was, oh my God, we've wondered all these years what happened to you. So it was a moment where I realized connections that you make at any point in your life, they don't just vaporize. And that was the beginning of the writing of the book. I wanted to clear up some things that were just messy, and I just hadn't had an opportunity to clear up a lot that happened early on in my childhood. I knew something was out of whack, but I needed to go in and do it. And my entire life, I had kind of been confused about, where does God fit in all this?
Mhm.
And that was, that was the crux of it. And then it came down to, as I started writing the book, there were so many different areas I knew I was going to have to cover. And one of them was when we went to see the electric chair.
Mhm.
And that was, that could have been just this one off. And, we never thought about it, talked about it again, but it planted a seed.
Well,
And yeah,
I want to hear more about that. And obviously, you became, when I met you, you were involved in mitigation work. So helping uncover the
yeah,
stories behind people facing execution to help make the argument that there is something that helps us understand that such people deserve mercy because of what happened to
mhm,
them. And that's one of the things, one of the thoughts in my head that I had reading this book was how grateful I am that you survived, given what you came out of and some of the. I mean, I don't think you had any kind of directly abusive childhood in the sense of being beaten or anything, but you had stuff beaten into your head and
yeah,
you lived in the space of addiction and and that kind of thing, where um and that influences people. One of the things that we see consistently through the people that are executed in almost every case is some form of abuse or neglect or addiction that touches a person at childhood, whether it's in them
mhm,
or the people around them. And so I'm grateful that you survived and the experiences that you had, and that is not to indicate anything any that's necessarily unusual or terrible about your own
mhm.
childhood. Just what you talk about coming out of, and what you describe as the Southern child in the Southern church. Today we hear so much about Christian nationalism, and to me,
Oh,
it sort
yeah,
of feels kind of in the same way, which we know is, far beyond the South. It's everywhere,
yeah.
and frighteningly so. Um, there's a lot of directions that we could go in. Just for those who are joining us now, we're talking about Susan McBride's book, When God Goes Missing, looking for meaning through the eyes of a Southern child. You mentioned in your introducing yourself, Dicey. Is that how you say her
That's,
name?
yeah, Dicey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you to just share a bit about, let's see, I made a bookmark on this. I should probably put on my glasses, but there's a poem that you have about Dicey.
Mhm.
Is that something that you can share with us?
Sure.
Does that fit in where we're at?
Yeah, I
Here it
think so.
is. Yeah, and what made me flip this corner was just the was this. Uh, well, I'm going to stop there and just ask you to let's go ahead and share that, and then we can talk about it.
Okay. Mm. If I woke up one morning and God had changed me into a Negro child, would you still love me all the same? I'm 8 years old and my daddy's got me thinking. All this preaching about God's unconditional love and how it's like the way parents love their children. I smell a fish. My mother was in no mood for my silliness. Come back when you've got a question that's about something that's possible. But God can do anything. Doesn't that mean turning me into a Negro child possible? My daddy says I shouldn't mock God. I never reckoned that's what I was doing. He turned on his preacher voice. Now, if God turned you into a Negro child, it would be for a very good reason and not something we would understand. But would you still love me all the same? Dicey comes to clean our house every Monday. She dusts like she doesn't care. She's moving things around that my mother has set in place, and later my mother will complain. Dicey keeps moving things from where I put them. I wish she'd just leave them alone. Dicey knows, but she does it anyway. Your mama got too many salt and pepper shakers. She need to give some of these to Dicey. Some weekends when my mother's busy, I go to Dicey's house out in the country. Dicey's girls and I jump double dutch in the dirt side yard. They know the best rhymes. I share them with the white girls. Dicey's house smells clean and always light greens. Her girls and I study color. Put your arm up next to ours, they say. We stare. Dicey irons and watches us. 6th grade, Negro children come to my school. Now it's their school too, just not in their neighborhood. The teachers act like it's always been this way. They don't want any trouble. They talk like we're all the same. Nope, they don't want any trouble. I get my homework done while Dicey makes supper before my mother arrives. I think about her girls and the rhymes and our arms lined up like a flag. Dark, light, dark. I don't mention any of this to my mother or dad. Some things are best kept to myself. All over the South, people are marching and sitting, and preachers are preaching a godly confusion. After church, my mother and I go to lunch. There's reserved signs on all the restaurant tables. My heart sinks. It's okay. You can sit anywhere you want, the waitress says to us. At the door, a Negro family is stopped. No room in the inn. Their faces appear determined. I don't want to eat in this place ever again. Ever. I tug at my mother. She pays no attention to my questions. The Negro family stands their ground at the door. My mother tells me to stay still in case there's trouble. I saw trouble on the tables before the Negro family arrived. Now we're back home. The house is still. A dark sadness shadows everything that never gets said. I'm a child with a simple question. It will be years before I know I was not alone, that lots of children wanted to know. If I woke up one morning and God changed me into a Negro child, would you still love me all the same?
It's it's so powerful, and so it makes you wonder how many other people had the impact of the person that was hired to take care of them that their parents never knew about.
Yeah.
Certainly, she made a huge impact on you. Did you ever get to talk with Dicey
No,
later?
the last time I saw her, which I didn't know it was the last time I would be seeing her, we moved. My mother was not concerned about the relationship I had with her. So when I finally did ask, was I ever going to see her again, um, was told no. We moved a state over. So by the time I could have seen her again, she had was deceased.
Mhm.
So that was why I felt like it was so important. And my professor really pushed me, said, go talk to her kids.
So
And
you went back up to Huntsville, Alabama, is that right?
uh-huh. Yeah, I went to Huntsville, and we have been talking since. I sent them a copy of the book. Um,
How
yeah.
long ago was it that you reconnected?
Oh, it's been over 10 years.
Right.
It's been a minute. I've been back down a few times. We've had conversations. I got to meet Dicey's older sister and one of the daughters that she had sent to live in Chicago because she didn't want her stuck cleaning white people's houses.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just there's so many directions again, for those who are just joining us, we're talking about the book, um, When God Goes Missing, and looking for meaning through the eyes of a Southern child by Susan McBride. And there's a link, well, not a link, there's a link in the piece that goes attached to the social media broadcast. But you can find the book by searching Susan Hudson McBride, When God Goes Missing, on Amazon. Or if you can find Susan, you can buy it from her directly,
Yeah.
which would be even better. So she lives in Nashville. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, in Huntsville, your dad apparently helped build rockets as part of
Yeah.
the among other things, right? He also apparently touched a lot of people with his preaching in probably good and bad ways, I guess. But you
Mhm.
could talk about that. But just the idea that you had actually been in the space of Werner von Braun and met his people, and that whole legacy that the United States has of bringing Nazis to work on the stuff that we wanted them to work on here in the United States. Um,
Um,
I've never met anybody that's actually touched that directly. Can you share a little bit about that experience?
yeah, when I was a kid, we would get in the car, and drive over to Redstone Arsenal, and families would be able to, be near where they were, testing a rocket, and it was really loud and really exciting, and, we didn't understand, as kids especially, we didn't understand what that was all about. So, we're having a night out, listening to this rocket go off, deafening sound, and, one day my dad comes home and says his boss had a child who was having problems making friends. And of course, the background is, the von Brauns came over here from Germany. They were recruited, I guess, by the United States government. And I would imagine it was very difficult for his children to come over here and lose all the friends that they had, being here where the culture was different. I can't imagine coming from Germany to Huntsville, Alabama at that time. But, we went to the home. I never met the child. Mrs. von Braun came out, and whichever child it was that she was looking for a playmate, that never materialized. The thing that did happen was, my dad and a number of his friends who worked at Redstone Arsenal were recruited by the CIA to go on trips. And they would go, we would not be able to, they couldn't tell family where they were going. It was a secret trip. And all I knew was my dad came back each time and seemed a bit shattered. And it wasn't for a very long time that I found out, the people, he and his friends were recruited to go and upend other governments. And he had a friend, we went to their house, a friend of his that went on these trips with him. And we went over there one day, and I was playing with the kids. Our dads were talking, and it was one of those situations where, kids pick up on things, and I could tell something was bothering the dads. And the next time my dad went on a trip, he came back just shattered. And a couple of days after he got home, my mother had to take him to a hospital because he had a total meltdown. And what had happened was he got to, I think he said, Iran, and his friend wasn't there, and his friend had asked too many questions, and he and his family were disappeared. And that was the first time I ever knew that a family could completely go invisible. And we went to the house, and my dad, we walked in the house where these people had lived, and it was completely had this antiseptic smell, new carpet, new paint. There was no sign of the people at all. And my dad held me up, and there was an opening in a door jamb in the kitchen above one of the doors. And he said, "See if you can find a note." And no matter what I did, looking in it, reaching in there, I couldn't. And my dad sat on the floor and bawled like I didn't know my dad. I'd never seen him cry like this. And that was that was just a really hard time. It said a lot about there's something going on in this country that isn't clean, that isn't okay. I mean, you know what happens to people is really scary.
These friends were people from the United States.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's one of the things you allude to in that part of the book is that your father mentioned that people can disappear. And
Yeah.
it is, the times that we're in, people don't, I think are not recognizing that reality still exists.
Yeah.
And a part of what they're doing is disappearing people out loud in some ways, but we have to be
Mhm.
watching out for where this could go. Um, we could go way down that path, but I want to pull back from it because it's heavy. Thank you for sharing all that. Um, you know, you talk about your dad and the long car rides that you had and how that was sort
Mm.
of a liberating space for the two of you. And what struck me when I read that was you have had until he died, and even still, you're still talking about these car rides that you went on with Hector Black. And
Yeah.
and I wanted to give you a moment to share about Hector and if that had I mean, obviously a long car ride is important with anybody
Mhm.
when you get to just talk or just be together, but your relationship with Hector has always been inspiring and something that made me a little bit jealous even. But share about Hector Black and car rides and
Yeah.
how it translates to you for your dad.
Look up a photo that I have of him and his wife Susie. Um, let's see if I can get. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's Hector and Susie, and that's actually a photo I took of them in Boston when we had um, a conference for family members of
That
people
was
who had been murdered.
the Murder Victim Families for Reconciliation Conference. I was at that
Yes,
one.
yeah.
Yes.
His daughter, their daughter, had been murdered only a few months before, and they were positively shattered. The way I met Hector, a friend of mine had decided to go and debate somebody about the death penalty in Cookeville, Tennessee. And it was, oddly enough, a Church of Christ president of some college there. And Harmon Ray, Harmon was going to go there and debate this guy, and he didn't know, I knew it was a setup, but Harmon had never faced anything like this before. So he goes, and they just absolutely, we got there and there were buses and buses and buses of people. And Harmon and I and a few other folks were kind of all huddled together. And the debate was a sham. It was totally, well, at the end of it, they asked people if they wanted to ask questions. And there was this tall guy with this wispy white hair in his overalls, and he walks up and he just says, "I'm just wondering," he said, "you're Jesus. Wasn't he about forgiveness? And do you ever see uh, forgiveness as the response to when someone does something wrong and they try to get their life back together?" And of course, um, they couldn't shut Hector down because he was correct. They wanted to talk about Jesus and Christianity, and Hector, a Quaker, was teaching them. Well, not long after that, got a phone call that Hector's daughter down in Atlanta had been murdered, and it was a grisly, awful murder. And Hector contacted me and said, "I'm having to look at this in an altogether different way. It's very personal now." And we went through several years, going back and forth talking about, how do you manage something like this? And I know there's a lot of people that you work with, murder victims' family members, who have a very deep, abiding sort of, they understand the reality of this in a way that I don't, but Hector and Susie did. So they, when they went to his trial, Hector stood up and read a statement. And he just said, the man who killed his daughter is named Ivan Simpson. And he said, Ivan Simpson, I hate with everything in me what you did. And he said, then he looked at his eyes and he said, but I cannot bring myself to hate you. And Ivan Simpson walked out of that room in tears. He knew at that point, he knew he had done something horrible. And because of the way Hector responded to him in his statement and just the person Hector was, it made a huge difference. So eventually, Hector and Susie were able to go and visit him. And I recall going to their house right before Christmas one year, and this is when you could still send packages in. And Susie said, I never thought I would see the day that we would have a package on the table addressed to the man who murdered our child. But there, these things happen. Yeah.
It's so powerful, and that you got to spend so much time with Hector, and again, the long car rides that you took with your dad
Mhm.
got you the opportunity to connect in a different way than you could when you were at home.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, One other thing about Hector, he ended up spending a lot of time on Tennessee's death row, visiting with people there. And that, I would go in. Sometimes I went in as a volunteer chaplain. Sometimes I was doing mitigation. It depended on which part of my life we were dealing with. And I would mention something about I had just been out to see Hector, and it just lifted everything. Um, the guys out there really loved him.
Amazing. Um, there's another chapter in your book where you talk about the Elvis Presley connection, but in particular, Dee and Teresa. But what really jumped at me from that was your admonition as church is a scary place,
Mhm.
and um, and 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 another part where you talk about um, you told somebody you wanted to find God, and they took you to an AA meeting, and
Yeah,
you said,
yeah,
why do I need to go to an AA meeting? And she said, your friend said that this is where I found God. So, you
yeah.
know, the subtitle of your book, and again, for people that haven't seen the whole thing, we're talking about this book, When God Goes Missing, um, looking for meaning through the eyes of a Southern child, with Reverend Susan Hudson McBride. Um, I guess that's, let's talk about that a little bit. What is the meaning that you're finding um, in the space? I'm going to just assume that when you mean when God goes missing, that, you know, you allude to this in a number of places.
Mhm.
You know, you don't have to be in church to find God. And in fact, you're probably being in church has nothing to do with being in a building, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So talk about that.
Well, Emily Dickinson in she does this poem where she talks about walking around among the flowers and in the garden, and that's church for her. And it tended to be that way for me and my dad, or when I was on those long rides with the Hector. Um, going out and seeing the wildflowers, going out and being in nature, seeing what God had created, it kind of put a different spin on the notion that whatever God my church worshiped, there was something besides this hateful, vengeful God. And that was, my way of getting away from all the hatefulness was to just go. I still do that. I'll get on the back roads now, and there we have several counties here that are very much rural, and just go ride, and I can stop and talk to anybody I run into, and I invariably run into some of the finest people. I don't know what their politics are. I do know that they have, for me, they're all children of God. And if we can have conversations and build bridges, yeah, I'm all about that. And at the same time, enjoy nature itself. And one of the things I truly miss is going out in the spring, out into Jackson County, and having Hector remark on all the wildflowers out there. He and Susie were two big wildflower enthusiasts. That's where they found God. And, in that and in relationships with people, I wish we weren't in a world where politics has such a strong rule over how we respond to one another. I've said I'm 74 now. I would love to spend the rest of my life just doing some things out of love. I don't want to do it out of any other reason, and I don't mean that in some kind of superficial way. I do believe in loving people, and a big part of that is being patient with people, and being patient with myself. And sometimes that's the hardest part.
Sure, sure. But speaking of being patient, and thank you for all of that. Obviously we're on a platform with death penalty action, and you and I met
Mhm,
doing this work to try to stop executions, and you were working um, in mitigation work, and um,
mhm,
actually, I was kind of surprised by the name of the chapter where you talk about mitigation work.
mhm.
My goodness, it's page 81.
Yeah.
Again, for those who are just joining us or just popped in, we're talking about when God goes missing, looking for meaning through the eyes of a Southern child. But one of the longer chapters in this book is where you talk about Odessa
Yeah.
and the whole and the way you found some common ground with her to get her to open up, and then the bigger realization that came to you through working on that case. And I don't even remember the name of the prisoner who whose case you were working on. And that probably doesn't
Mhm,
matter because, like we talked about earlier, you know, the common thread through almost everybody that gets executed is what happened to them in childhood.
mhm,
But before we close for this conversation, and we're going to have another one at some point, but I wanted to invite you to share about how that you know the mitigation work that you did and the experiences that you've had around that have really helped you help others see and understand about the death penalty.
mm. Well, I went into mitigation. I was actually working in an office called Restorative Justice Ministries. And I had been working with some local attorneys and investigators on some cases they had coming up. And it was all death penalty attorneys. And one of the attorneys called and said, would you like to come and look at a case? And I went and I started reading the case and started commenting on what I saw there. And he said, okay, while you continue to read that, I'm going to create a contract here to get you paid. And I was astounded. I thought, you're going to what? And that's how my mitigation investigator days got started. I would travel. I spent a lot of time on the road visiting family members. And one of the things that occurred to me over and over is that the families of the people who had been arrested for murder were a lot of times in just as bad a state or worse than the person who had been arrested. And a lot of those were the mothers. And every time I think about when someone has committed a crime, and now it's, we know all the statistics and the data, and we know who ends up going to prison. We know who ends up not going there. And the people who were arrested and put on death row in Tennessee were some, there was a man that used to stand on street corner with, when we were protesting, every week we would protest and we'd stand out in Hillsborough Village, a man named David Eason. And one day he said, it occurred to me, these aren't the most horrible of the horrible. These are the unluckiest of the unlucky. They're the ones that, things didn't go right in their trial. Something about them, something about their being poor, something about the mental health, their just all the things we know that stack up and make it impossible to get away from receiving a death sentence. And particularly, Tennessee is, people want to call us a purple state. I want to be that. I think in some places we've been gerrymandered to the point that that's hard. But cases here that go up for the death penalty, I look at them sometimes and I'm thinking, I can think of something a lot more horrible that's gone on. And no one is looking at that. And, here we're taking somebody and giving them the death penalty. The chapter about Odessa, that was a compilation of several mothers and several cases, because I didn't want somebody to be able to come back and say, oh, I know who you're talking about. Because I don't, I absolutely did not want to create an embarrassment for anyone. So there's a lot of things in there. All the things that are in that chapter happened, but it is a compilation of things. And knowing that there are a lot of kids, a lot of the people whose cases I worked on were abused as kids, were not wanted. Odessa told me at one point, she said, I know you're going to think I'm a terrible person but I didn't want these kids. She was raped when she was 12 and 13 by a 23-year-old guy who got her pregnant. And then her dad, all of them worked in the coal mines. Her dad decided, yeah, you got my daughter pregnant, you're going to marry her. And it just started from there. It was just spiraling. It was not going to turn out well. So Odessa, in part, all the women that I talked to, that I interviewed, had such similar stories. And so it didn't surprise me one day that one of the women sent me a CD of her singing, and she was singing church songs. And it was her way of making sense of what was happening in her life. So, yeah, mitigation is complicated. There's times I wish, I were still doing that work, and there's other days when I think, what are you talking about? It's hard. It's hard work, and it will wear you out. But yeah,
It's it's fight on. It's and how many cases did you work on over the course of your
oh
career as a
wow.
mitigation specialist?
I am not sure.
Okay.
I
Well,
would have to. I would have to. Yeah, I would. I would. I was. I worked on cases over a little over 12 years, so I would have to go back and look at
that's okay.
names.
Are there any? And well, this is one of the things I wish I knew about you. Are there any of the cases where you're actually, as part of your mitigation work, successful in getting somebody off a death row?
Yes, two cases I worked on in Chattanooga. Um, both cases were involved severe mental health issues, and one of them was a policeman was shot by a guy that had a psychotic break. The other was a guy who murdered his wife and two children, and he had already previously murdered someone. And just getting to know those two men and seeing what the incredible um, the way that things were done to them as kids and on up, and then fortunately, both murders were horrible, but there were a couple of attorneys that just dug down in and gave us, anything we needed to get the information and just the steadfastness they had to win a case. Because unfortunately, that's what it's about. If an attorney doesn't do their job really well, um, chances are somebody's going to die. And in this case, there were two women attorneys who really dug in and they changed things. They turned it around. Now, both of them ended up going to prison, but one is out. One has been out for a while and he's already written a book, and doing well for himself. The other guy will never be out.
Mhm.
And that's hard.
It is, sure. So I want to invite you, if you're open to it. Before we close, I'm going to take a little commercial break here for a moment, but then I was kind of if you're open to it, you could read the the poem that's on 39, page 39, if you would like to, as a way to close. But I just want to share, for a moment, that I put in, well, you can see at deathpenaltyaction.org, that's where you can sign the petitions. The next person's, we're still developing case background on some of the upcoming executions that don't even start till towards the end of January at this point. But earlier today, if you're on Death Penalty Actions list, I sent out an email about the next man that's scheduled to be executed in Oklahoma. See if I can find that. Kendrick Simpson is his name, who was deeply scarred by his experiences, in particular, surviving being the victim of a drive-by shooting, but also survived the Hurricane Katrina and ended up in Houston, and that's or in Oklahoma City, I should say, and that's where that murder happened. And there's it's the mitigation, it's the reality of the post-traumatic stress that impacted that individual,
Mhm.
and that's the case that we're trying to make. So we're going to be sending more information out about that. But in particular, what I wanted to say at this point is that we've had a record-setting year of executions, 47 executions, nearly twice as many as we did in all of the previous year, 2024. We had 47 in 2025, and now we don't know what's going to happen in 2026, but there's nothing to suggest it'll be any less. It's nothing to suggest that we'll probably have more executions in Florida than 19, which is what they had this year, because Governor DeSantis is going to be getting going just as soon as we get past this. To his credit, it would seem this is the first time almost all year that there hasn't been anybody on death watch, which means when they set your execution date, they take you out of the out of the death
Mm.
row and put you in a totally solitary environment, and they take away most of your stuff and all of that. And they've had 2 or 3 people in that space at a time for the last number of months, and now he stopped signing death warrants for a few minutes, and so Merry Christmas, everybody. Just wait, because this next. Once we get past the holidays, I presume he's going to start signing death warrants again, and we can expect that it will continue every uh, every 2 to 3 weeks, another execution in Florida. And then who knows what's going to happen. Texas only had 2 executions this year, and they've already got I think 4 people scheduled. Tennessee has 4 people scheduled. We know that Oklahoma is going to do one just about every 90 days. They've run out of people to schedule in Missouri for a little bit, so that's good. Georgia is trying to start up executions again. They made a promise to not execute people during COVID, and then they were almost ready to break that. They tried. There was a man who was supposed to be executed on the 17th of December, and luckily, his lawyers were very effective in rooting out the corruption within the Georgia parole board that made them a number of people there recuse themselves. Point being, we're going to see another year of more executions than we've seen in a long time. And this is in the space of a place where, support for the death penalty by public opinion is at its lowest levels in over 50 years. New death sentences, lowest levels consistently. And the people that they're executing are the people that have been there for a long, long time, and that's going to continue. So that's what death penalty actions work is to shine a spotlight on this, to make sure that there's an opportunity for anybody who wants to oppose executions, every execution, not just the ones that are high profile or have something in particular that a few people want to think is worthy of being highlighted. We oppose every single one. And of course, what we found is even in the cases where it doesn't seem like there's anything worthy of talking about, there is. And you don't find that until you get deep into it and you're talking to their families and all that. And that's what we do at Death Penalty Action, is make sure that we're lifting up the voices of people that are most directly impacted by this, and that we're addressing every single execution. Again, regardless of if it's a high profile case or there's an innocence issue or something else that makes it more worthy of mercy because we believe everybody is worthy of mercy, and more to the point, we believe the government can't be trusted with this power to execute people and to get it right. So if you value what we're up to and what we're doing, then I invite you, if you're able, if nothing else, share this video, share the petitions, sign and share the petitions. But if you have any money that you can put in to help us or whatever your other favorite anti-death penalty groups are, now's the time. Everybody's trying to make their big year-end goals. The good news for Death Penalty Action is that we have some supporters that are quadrupling every donation that comes in. So we've got about $3,000 left to close that gap of a $40,000 cap on the quadrupling. So if you can, go to Death Penalty Action and chip in. So there's the commercial. Let's bring it back to Susan Hudson McBride. We've been talking. Is that okay to end with
Sure,
that? Okay, so we've been
sure.
talking about this book, When God Goes Missing, Looking for Meaning Through the Eyes of a Southern Child. And this Southern child, Reverend Susan Hudson McBride, sadly, it seems, lost your brother at age 4 when you were 14. How old was
I was
he?
14. Yeah, he was 11.
He was 11. He got caught up in a
Yeah,
riptide and
yeah.
drowned, apparently. And, um, it just reading that poem that you have about that experience touched me among so many other pieces of this book. It's a powerful book. I invite people to get the book and read it and share it. And we're going to have another opportunity to speak with Susan in a different space where we can have some interaction. I'm so grateful that we were able to make the time to do this. And if you would share a little bit about your brother and read us that poem, and we'll close out.
Jeff was 11 years old when he died. He was born in 55, so there was 4 years between us. And I never imagined that we would lose him in this way. I mean, who expects you go on, our mother's one of my best friends and her little brother were on vacation with me and my mother and my little brother, and you don't expect something bad to happen on a vacation, but we were in St. Augustine, and it was one of those situations where there were flags up on the beach. We didn't know what any of it meant. We just knew we looked like we had the beach to ourselves. So this is, yeah, that's my brother Jeff. That's probably that he was 11. That was the photo that was used in his memorial service. Okay. Before my brother drowned, I was watching my mother from behind, her feet barely touching the ocean that was taking her son out in waves. His body rose up and down while salty, sandy water rippled over her toes. Her screams were the ones I'd heard my whole life. When my aunt tried to teach her to swim, my mother got held onto the side of the pool, her body soaked with humiliation. "Oh, Charlotte," my aunt moaned, "put your face in the water. It won't kill you." It was on the mountains my mother felt safe, even with the bears, wildcats, and snakes. Me and my brother would run ahead of her and my dad on a trail where she would call out when we went too far. At our kitchen window, she would hold me and we would watch an approaching tornado wiggle and hop its way across fields. It was the water that left her unable to breathe. It was like when her father held her under, like when her mother snuffed out her dreams. My grandfather would say, "Your mother was always drifting. She couldn't be situated." I see her now, my mother holding the garden hose, standing by an inflated shell. She waits and watches as I splash and laugh. Her face is drawn and her tears fall, enough to fill my pool. I don't know if that's seeable, but
Hey, hold a little bit closer to the camera. There you go.
yeah.
Well, Susan, I want to thank you, and I wish you and yours and everybody that's watching a meaningful New Year's transition, and happy Kwanzaa if you do that, and God knows we all need a little bit more peace in 2026. So that's my wish for all of us, and and
Mhm.
and whatever brings you peace and love and joy, that's my wish for you. And again, thank you for taking the time in these in this holiday season to share with us, to be here with us, and for you, Susan, to share again your book, when God Goes Missing, um, and people can find that on Amazon. So thank you.